My name is Rachel Calloway. I am 31 years old. The ink on the notary seal was still wet when my father raised his glass and told 40 people that my brother Derek Calloway was the future of everything our family had built. I stood near the fireplace in my parents' living room holding a glass of wine I had not tasted yet, watching Derek absorb applause like sunlight. He was grinning the way he always grinned when something landed in his lap. Wide and easy. The smile of a man who has never had to fight for anything. His wife Tessa stood beside him in a dress that probably cost more than my first year of rent, squeezing his arm like she was already accepting an award, too. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. My Uncle Frank caught my gaze with the careful look of someone who knows a wrong is being done and does not have the power to stop it. I smiled at Frank. I did not need him to stop it. Because my father had just signed over Calloway Construction, and he had no idea I already owned the thing that actually mattered. I am a corporate attorney. Mergers. Acquisitions. Debt restructuring. What that means, practically, is that I spend my days untangling companies in crisis. I know exactly what a failing business looks like from the inside. I know what debt schedules look like. I know what covenant violations look like. I know what it means when a bank quietly shops a loan to a third-party creditor rather than foreclose publicly. And I knew all of that 18 months ago when Calloway Construction was 6 weeks from collapse. My father did not come to me. He would never come to me. Instead, he flew Derek in from Denver, sat him at the head of the conference table, and let him perform competence for hours, while I sat in my apartment 40 minutes away, watching the company's filings deteriorate in real time. Derek had no solutions. He had charm and confidence and a golf handicap. He offered my father all three with enthusiasm. My father thanked him, paid for his hotel, and sent him home. Then the bank called me. Not my father. Me. Because 18 months before this living room celebration, before the transfer documents and the applause and the wine I still hadn't tasted, I contacted Meridian Capital, the private lending group holding Calloway Construction's commercial loan. And I bought it. I paid full face value. I used money I had spent years accumulating, billing brutal hours at a firm that never slept. I did it quietly. I did it through a holding entity my father had never heard of. I became my family's bank, their creditor, the single entity with the legal authority to accelerate the debt, call the note, and trigger a default that would unwind every asset the company owned. I did it because I understood something even then. One day, someone in that family would try to take something from me, and I wanted to be ready. Standing in my parents' living room, watching my brother accept a company he did not save, I understood that day had arrived. Before I tell you what happened on Monday, make a prediction. Comment panic if you think Derek will melt down. Or comment bully if you think he will try to intimidate his way out. Tessa found me near the bookshelf about 20 minutes after the announcement. She was carrying a fresh glass of champagne and wearing that expression people wear when they want you to know they won without saying it out loud. She asked if I was doing okay. She said it the way you ask someone if they are okay when you hope they are not. I told her I was wonderful. I asked about her drive up from the city. She studied my face for cracks. There were none. I had spent years in rooms full of people trying to find my weakness and walking away empty-handed. She was not going to succeed in a living room in 20 seconds. She moved on. My father found me next. He did not offer sympathy or pleasantries. He walked up beside me and stood shoulder to shoulder the way he used to when I was a child and he was about to explain something final. He said he hoped I understood this was a business decision. I told him I understood completely. He said Derek had a vision for expansion. New markets. Residential developments. A project in Phoenix he had been cultivating for years. He said the company needed energy, and Derek had it. So I asked one question. What is Derek's plan for the debt load? My father paused. A short pause. But I am trained to notice short pauses. He said they were working through options. I nodded. That sounded like a plan. He waited for me to say something else. To object or cry or do the thing I did years ago, when he told me he was pulling my name from the succession plan because Derek was older and it made more sense. I did not do that this time. I complimented the house and went to find my Uncle Frank. Frank was my father's younger brother and the only person in my family who had watched what I built without needing to minimize it. He found me on the back porch away from the noise and handed me a glass of water without being asked. He said he was sorry. I told him not to be. He said he knew what the company's financial situation looked like because he still sat on the advisory board and had access to the quarterly reports. I told him the quarterly reports did not tell the whole story. Frank looked at me for a long moment. He has the look of a man running a calculation. "You didn't just watch it happen," he said. I told him I never just watched anything happen. He asked if my father knew. I said not yet. Frank looked out at the yard. The light strung between oak trees. The laughter behind glass. He was quiet for a while, then said, "Whatever you're going to do, be sure. You can't undo a family." I thought about the younger version of me sitting across from my father with evidence and a cracking voice, begging to be taken seriously. I thought about the contract I brought to the company years ago. A huge client, and watching my father introduce Derek as the point of contact at the site visit. I told Frank the family had already handled the undoing part. Nobody wanted to admit it, but they had. He squeezed my shoulder and went back inside. I stayed on the porch longer, listening to congratulations and speeches and the sound of Derek receiving something I had quietly kept alive for a year and a half. And the Phoenix Project kept echoing in my head. 3 weeks earlier, I saw Garrison Properties in routine due diligence for an unrelated client. Buried in the footnotes of a disclosure was a pending securities inquiry involving inflated valuations used to secure investor funding. I filed it away and moved on. Then 2 days later, I saw a text on Derek's phone as it lit up face up on my parents' kitchen table. I was not snooping. The screen was simply there. Garrison confirmed. Closing timeline first quarter. Keep it quiet until the transfer is done. That was when it clicked. Derek wasn't planning expansion. He was planning a sale. He was going to accept ownership of Callaway Construction, hold it for the minimum comfortable period, and sell it to a developer under scrutiny. He would get a clean payout. The company's employees would get whatever Garrison decided after closing. He wasn't inheriting the family business. He was liquidating it. And he needed my father's transfer clean and finalized before anyone looked too closely at where the money would go. So I stayed through dinner. I ate the catered food. I listened to Derek give a speech about legacy and vision and the next chapter of the Callaway name. I watched Tessa film it on her phone. I hugged my mother at the door and told her the house looked beautiful. Then I drove 40 minutes back to my apartment and made a call at the end of a Friday night. I called my attorney. She answers late on Friday because I pay her enough that she does. I told her I wanted an acceleration notice issued first thing Monday morning. She asked if I was sure. I told her I had never been more sure of anything I had done in my professional life. Monday morning, the acceleration notice arrived at Callaway Construction's registered address. It was addressed to the owner of record, which was now Derek. It stated that a change in company ownership without written creditor consent constituted a default event. It demanded the full principal balance, plus accrued interest and penalties within 30 days. Derek called me less than an hour later. He said there had to be a mistake. I told him I do not make mistakes with numbers. He said he didn't understand. So I explained it like I was explaining it to a boardroom, not a brother. I told him I held the Meridian Capital loan. I told him the ownership transfer triggered the default clause in the credit agreement. I offered to send him the assignment documents if he needed to review them. There was a silence on the line. The sound of a man recalculating in real time as the floor turns to water under his feet. Then he asked the question people ask when their leverage stops working. "What do you want?" I told him I did not want anything. I was a creditor exercising a contractual right. He tried again. Softer. "Rachel, come on. What do you want?" So I told him what I wanted. One phone call. Call our father. Tell him about the first quarter closing timeline. Tell him about Todd Garrison. Tell him what you plan to do with the company he just signed over to you. And do it before I forward documentation to the advisory board. Derek said I wouldn't do that. I told him to think carefully about what evidence he had to support that belief. He called our father. I know because Frank called me 2 hours later. His voice carried the particular quiet of someone standing outside a room where something loud is happening. He said my father was in his office with the door shut and Derek's voice was audible from the hallway. He said my mother was in the kitchen, not looking at anyone. Frank asked if I wanted to come over. I told him I would be there in 40 minutes. When I walked into my parents' house, the dinner party version of it was gone. The champagne and applause were replaced by the ordinary weekday version. The kitchen smelled like coffee. The overhead lights were too bright. The whole place felt smaller without an audience. My father sat in his chair by the window, the one he uses when he needs to think. Derek sat on the couch and did not look at me. My father stared at me for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "How long have you held that loan?" 18 months, I said. He asked why I hadn't told him. I told him the truth. When the company was 6 weeks from default, he flew Derek in from Denver and didn't call me at all. I had spent a decade working around the belief that my involvement mattered less than Derek's. I stopped expecting that to change. I started working with the reality as it existed. My father said it wasn't fair. I told him I had been thinking about fairness for about 15 years and I was exhausted by the subject. He asked what I intended to do. I told him I intended to restructure. I told him I was prepared to convert the loan to equity, giving my holding entity a controlling stake in Callaway Construction. Under that structure, any sale to Todd Garrison or anyone else would require my written consent as majority stakeholder. The existing management team would stay in place. The employees would keep their jobs. The Callaway name would stay on the building. I set a single folder on the coffee table. Inside was a restructuring proposal I wrote over the weekend. Behind it were the assignment documents proving I held the loan. Behind that was the disclosure about the inquiry into Garrison properties, highlighted clearly. My father looked at the folder. Then he opened it. He read it the way he used to read contracts when I was young, slowly, rereading sections, going back and checking his understanding. He taught me that. Never skim something with your name on it. At some point, Derek went into the kitchen and made a phone call. His voice low and controlled. It did not matter who he called. The acceleration notice was already in motion. Any buyer's counsel would find it. Frank brought me coffee. He did not say anything. He sat down across the room and waited with me. My father finished reading. He set the folder on his knee and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for at first. Not anger. Not admiration. Something older and more complicated. "You did this alone," he said. "Yes," I said. "You bought the loan without telling anyone," he said. "You structured the holding entity. You managed the documentation for 18 months. And you stood in my living room on Friday night and said nothing." I told him I learned from watching him that you don't show your cards at a party. He went quiet. I watched him reach for the story where this was an attack, where I engineered the situation to punish Derek, where he made a reasonable business decision and I was weaponizing it. Then I watched him set that story down. He said, "I owe you an apology." I had prepared for everything except that. I told him the apology could wait. The restructuring needed a response before the end of the month. The clock was already running. He said he would sign. Derek came back from the kitchen and stood in the doorway. He said he guessed the whole thing had been a setup from the beginning. I told him the whole thing had been a company in financial crisis that needed someone to step in. And I stepped in. He said I'd been waiting for a chance to do this to him. I told him I'd been waiting for a chance to save something that mattered, while the person our father trusted with it was busy arranging an exit. Derek looked at our father, waiting for him to intervene, to restore the old order. My father didn't look up from the folder. One word only: comment legacy or ego. The restructuring closed a few weeks later. My holding entity converted the loan to equity. I became majority stakeholder. My father retained a minority share and a board seat. Frank stayed on the advisory board. Derek resigned the following week, citing a desire to pursue other opportunities. 6 weeks later, Garrison's company received a formal inquiry notification. The Phoenix project collapsed before ground was broken. I didn't send that information to anyone. Months later, my father called me and said he had been thinking. He said he had conversations with Frank that he should have been having years ago. He said he didn't know how to undo the decisions he made when I was young, but he wanted to try. I told him the conversation looked like breakfast. He said he could do breakfast. Tessa never called me. Derek sends holiday texts that feel like receipts. My mother calls on Sundays and listens more than she used to. I hold it lightly. The Calloway name is still on the building. The employees still have their jobs. Last spring, we broke ground on a residential development near where I grew up. Not Phoenix. Not a cash-out scheme. Just homes for people who needed them. One Saturday morning, I drove past the site and sat in my car looking at the equipment. The cleared land. The sign with the company name on it. My grandfather started that company with a truck and a handful of employees. My father grew it into something real. Whatever mistakes he made as a father, he built something that mattered. And 18 months before he raised his glass for Derek, I decided it was going to survive. I never needed the applause. I needed the outcome. And the outcome was a company still standing. If you want more real stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one will hit even harder.